For listeners who might not be familiar, Black Bloc is not as much as an organized group, but is a set of tactics that are used. And I just think, I also think it's interesting that we have, from all the protesters at the G20, the images of the Black Bloc and smashing the windows at Starbucks or a bank. We have that 1,000 times in the newspapers, but we don't really hear the message as much, because we don't hear the message of the majority peaceful protesters, because, the images, when it bleeds, it leads, even though there wasn't much bleeding here, but, the acts of vandalism seem to get the most attention from mainstream media.
As a tactic, I mean, I don't know, my organizing is explicitly nonviolent, and that's what I ascribe to. That's how I organize. However, I was one of the folks who accepted a diversity of tactics before the G20 summit took place. There was a lot of discussion amongst groups. Like, that the Black Bloc showed up was not a surprise to anyone, which was something that the media hasn't picked up on. Like, the organizers of Saturday's rally knew Black Bloc was coming. It was publicly organized on Facebook. Like, It wasn't a surprise to anyone.
So if anything, though, why did the police, they didn't seem to go after their organizers, did they?
Well, I mean, Black Bloc, by its nature, doesn't really have organizers. But I mean, it's back to a tactic of getting into the media and having front page. And, one of the complexities of Black Bloc is, that I think people do need to know, and power needs to know, that there is a level of anger that won't be contained within set frameworks, and that there is a real urgency to address the ecological, social issues that are going on in this world, and that some people won't stand by idly and wait for bureaucrats to make decisions that are ineffective and do nothing to change the system of capitalism that we have, which is broken and is failing the majority of the people. So in that, I support them. In another, as a movement strategy, we need to begin to rethink how Black Bloc tactics are being employed by the police. Like, they use Black Bloc in order to get media sympathy, to legitimize the money that they spent on the summit. And at this point, I think that while Black Bloc is something that will not go away, my advocacy is that the tactics begin to change some, and that we recognize that there's a great symbolism to smashing a window, and that, in my interpretation of what violence is, I certainly would never equate smashing a window with carpet bombing Afghanistan like Canada does. There's a major difference between how we term what violence is when looked at through those lenses, but that we do begin to change those tactics and recognize that they are playing into corporate media and they are playing into police tactics, and that we need to adapt as a movement to move forward.
Yeah, and can you tell us about your day, if it's all right to look at it, the day of the G20? Did you face any more issues because of your identity as an activist and an organizer on the actual summit day?
Yeah, I mean, I got arrested at Novotel with everyone else.
Oh, right.
So I was, 20 hours back into the cages, and I witnessed the brutality that was going on in there, and I mean, it was absolutely horrific. Again, if we're going to compare what violence was, a smashed window doesn't compare to... I sat beside two individuals for about 8 hours. One guy was obviously concussed. His pupils were dilated. He had a huge goosebump on his forehead. The other individual turned out to have a broken cheekbone when I talked to him later on. And they sat there for 8 hours asking the police to let them see a medic. And the police ignored them. Nor gave them water. Nor gave them a phone call. For myself, I eventually got a phone call. It was at about 15 hours in. But I was a lucky one. The majority of people didn't receive phone calls, didn't receive water, didn't receive food, didn't receive medical treatment. I was put into a cage that was 6x8 where there was 8 other individuals in there and no toilet. We had to beg the police if we had to go to the washroom.
And a final question, noting the things that took place within the film studio that served as a makeshift prison for anybody who showed any dissent. And there were even some people arrested who were actually just literally bystanders and weren't actually even demonstrating in any way. But of course, the majority were peaceful demonstrators. Has this experience made you want to cut down on your activism at all? Because I'm wondering if some of the things that the police might and the government might be looking for is that this will, ordeals like this will intimidate activists and dissenters and make them not want to think it's worth it. Do you feel that way at all, or do you still feel it's worth it?
No, I'll be out on the streets for the foreseeable future. FEMA camps are a reality, and yeah, they're scary places. Essentially what we were put in was a FEMA camp. For those folks listening, YouTube FEMA camp and see what it is. That was essentially what we were placed in. A highly structured environment where, bright lights, temperature kept to about 5 degrees Celsius. We were all soaking wet when we got in there, so you're cold and shivering, and, it's meant to humiliate you and demoralize you. And in an honest thing, I was not impressed in some of the ways with some of the behavior that we as activists kind of exhibited in those spaces. I'm not talking about the anger that we displayed to police. I think that was legitimate. I was screaming at them and telling them, fuck you, this is unjust, and you know it. And they did know it. They knew it. But I'm talking about some of the misogynist comments and the patriarchy that actually developed within that space that I noticed. It was something that we as a movement have to go back and reflect on, because there was also, I'll balance that off by saying there was great resilience, hope, and love shown in those places as well, where people came together, sang songs, and danced and tried to make the space our own. But as a movement, I think moving forward, one of the things that we need to recognize is that these spaces exist now, and things aren't going to get any easier. We've seen neoliberalism largely discredited, even by corporate media, have largely discredited neoliberalism, yet we have powers on top, and particularly the Canadian government, forcing through a neoliberal agenda to keep facilitating the polarization of wealth that we've seen throughout the world over the last 25 years. The massive accumulation of capital, that's not going to stop. They're not going to go back to Keynesian economics and some sort of save, nor will that save us. We're at the point of ecological collapse. So expect more. There will be more camps like this. How we need to organize as those that are trying to create a just world and a better world is to adapt to these things, get ready for them, prepare, conduct ourselves with dignity, honor, respect, love, all of those things when we're in those spaces, because we need to transform them. And we need to show the people who are locking us up, which they did see, that they are creating a great injustice. The police are not necessarily against us. Their interests lie with ours. We're talking about creating a better world, one where there's greater social democracy, where people actually have a voice, where we have a right to a clean, healthy environment, where, you can express your political ideology without fear of repercussion. And police interests are with ours. They're not wealthy.
They're workers.
Yeah, they're working class, Some of their upper managers and whatnot are definitely getting into bureaucratic kind of upper management class. But as a general kind of thing, the saddest thing that I heard from police when we would call out to them, why are you doing this? Why are you possibly doing this? They said, because it's for a good paycheck. Well, those paychecks aren't going to keep coming. There's a limited number of years that system is going to be able to prop it up. Well, in likelihood, government will make sure that police is one of the last things axed. But, as an appeal to police out there listening to this, give your heads a shake. Your interests aren't with theirs. They're with ours. Get on our side. We don't need these guys.
That the FEMA camp sounds like nothing like something taking place in Canada that, a lot of Canadians like to think about, but it sounds like that is becoming the reality. So Dave Vasey, is there anything else you want to add before we get going?
Love is the movement.
All right, that's Dave Vasey. This is Jesse Zimmerman reporting from Toronto in this series, Political Prisoners of the G20. Stay tuned. We got more coming. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.